Alright everyone, it's time to weigh in on the It's Okay to Be White campaign. The basic idea is that people are writing that on slips of paper and leaving them places, number one, and number two, posting it on social media. And it's got some people upset, but it seems, here's the funny part, most of the people that are upset at this appear to themselves be white, and I think I know what's going on. I was trying to make this video before, but I ranted too much. I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more terse. But I had this idea. I think the problem is this. What's happened is that people who are from like the upper rung of the middle class, who happen to be, generally white, they have like the trust fund, they live in a gated community, they got like dentist parents or something. They're the ones that are upset at this because they're the ones who think that whites should feel guilty for being white because of white privilege. The reason why they think that is they were raised in a very isolated, very insular situation, where the only time they interacted with a minority is in the context of like academia, where most of the people around them were white, and they were upper middle class. Like a person from the general center of the middle class to them would be a poor person. So when they look around at their lily white gated community, you can begin to understand, I think, why they think whites have innate privilege. Meanwhile, the people telling them this, that are enforcing this, are all very wealthy. They're not always white, but a lot of them are. They're all very wealthy. They never pay reparations or do anything. In fact, they mistreat others regularly. The pundit class, the politicians, their various bureaucrats, lobbyists, the general scum of society, the televangelists and stuff. These people predominantly are parasites on our society. We'd be better off without most of them. At the same time, by the way, in full admission, we'd be better off without idiots like David Duke, too, who's basically, he is to the white people, as like maybe a Jesse Jackson is to black people. He's just shrill, and he sort of gets off and makes a living on baiting people, pretending to speak to for people he has very little in common with. But the problem is that these gated community liberals, who are the ones rambling about white privilege and pretending to be really upset, and sometimes it is just pretense, it's keeping up appearances. It's sort of like back in the yuppie days, oh yeah, I like Swedish music, I love fondue. You don't even necessarily like these things. You're literally doing things to keep up appearances. It's like some person who doesn't even like music or anything. They buy like a $5,000 stereo system. Oh yeah, I've got the latest stereo system. You're doing it to keep up with the Joneses. Some of these people are like that. Let's just focus on those that are more serious though. They think that whites routinely have privilege. They're actually stereotyping their own race because they themselves do not have any experience with, some white from outer Appalachia with a dirt floor fucking log cabin. Some person like myself who was raised on the lower level of the working class. I lived in a household. My dad was a chef. My mom was a stay-at-home mom who did some, odd jobs like dog walking, babysitting and stuff. We never had a lot of money. For most of my life until 2 days before I went to high school, we were certainly within that lower working class situation. We managed to, when we rose up to like the margins of the lower middle class when I went to high school, I thought we were fantastically wealthy because I was used to, something that approached abject poverty. So it's somebody who happens to be white saying to somebody like me with my kind of upbringing, hey, whites have universal privilege. You shouldn't be proud to be white. You should feel guilty because, you're benefiting off of slavery. You're benefiting off some fucking system that was built by white people. Evil, evil, evil. It's terrible that they built anything. I'm never going to listen to your argument. I'm never going to take it seriously because my upbringing was totally different from yours. Most of you were raised up with privilege. But privilege comes from money and political power, corporate capabilities, things like that, connections to organized crime. That's where your privilege comes from. It doesn't have anything to do with the amount of melanin that you have in your skin. You didn't choose the situation of your own birth. In reality, a person who's black who has a six-figure income has far more privilege than a poor white person. That's the truth. It is objectively true. But you will never see this alluded to by any of these people from their gated communities because they've never really interacted with a poor white person. The only time they've seen poverty, maybe they took a trip to Africa for some humanitarian mission that they did to feel good about themselves. They did it for an extracurricular, for, you know, fucking going to college. They're like, well, yeah, daddy's trust fund will pay for everything, but I want to go to, you know, I want to go to a good school. I need some extracurriculars. I'll do this missionary trip or something. And they go off and they hang around with a bunch of, you know, little kids and give them, you know, trinkets or something. They think that they've changed the world. You haven't changed the world. Most of the world is shit. Most of the world lives in desperate poverty. That includes a very large proportion of all the white people in the world, too. You go to Eastern Europe. Yeah, go there. Why don't you take your missionary trip to a part of rural Poland or something? A halfway decent developing nation. Plenty of poverty there, too. People living in commie block apartments. Oh, yeah, we sleep 10 to a room. Yeah, you know, we skip meals occasionally. What about you go to Appalachia? Go to the margins of West Virginia sometime, to an area hit heavily by the opiate crisis. You can see lots of white people with a lot of privilege there. Little kids being raised, you know, they're walking barefoot all the time. Yeah, they've got a dirt floor and no heat. What a wonderful, privileged existence. Now, I think that you're full of crap. I think that you're just blind. The funny thing is that these pseudo-intellectuals would tell somebody like me, well, you're blind to your own privilege. You don't know what it's like to be X, Y, and Z. You don't know what it's like to be black. You don't know what it's like to be Native American. Yeah, that's true. And you don't know what it's like to be poor. So what's the fucking difference? You're saying, well, you can never know truly what it's like to be a member of this race. You can never know. Why don't you go live with a really, really poor West Virginian family without your smartphone and your trust fund for a couple of months? See how you like it and how privileged you feel. Yeah, what are we eating tonight? Oh, nothing. Oh, what are we eating tomorrow? Oh, maybe we'll be able to shoot a possum. Yeah, wonderful. Why don't you walk a mile in my shoes from when I was young? You know, actually wearing, you know, your dad gets mad at his manager, quits his job, and you're worried about being out on the streets, so you don't have that problem. You don't know what it's like because you weren't raised up that way. You were at least raised up in the margins of the upper middle class, usually. Your family did well, and by the way, I don't blame them for that. Good, they're giving you a good life. You've got the trust fund, you've got security, you've got money, you've got a decent car, a good job, you know, whatever you've got. Good, that's not a bad thing. You should not feel guilty for having access to these things. Anyone telling you to feel guilty for it, yeah, tell them to go fuck off. But you shouldn't be trying to make others feel guilty. You're white, therefore privileged. No, you do. You're privileged, yes, I agree with you, because your family has a decent amount of money. You know, if you get charged, like drug possession, they'll probably give you, like, probation. They'll make you do community service and write an apology letter to your school. You know what happens to someone someone who's white, black, doesn't matter, who's from, like, the lower rungs of society? When the same thing happens, oh, yeah, you're going to Rikers, something like that. Well, you don't know what it's like. You weren't raised in an inner city. You weren't raised out in the sticks either. Pardon the pun. You weren't raised in a lower class situation. Most of you. Some of you were. I feel very, very sorry for you for having to deal with people who make you feel like you have to pretend to be offended at this campaign. No, I say, yeah, it's okay to be white. I'm white, and I feel just fine about the fact that I'm white. Yeah. I don't feel guilty at all. Slavery. Oh, well, I never contributed to slavery. All of us have contributed to child labor over in, like, China and stuff like that, which is, by the way, I would agree with the left on this, is regrettable that that exists. But if you want to stop, if you have a problem with, like, slavery, well, then why aren't you going to help rescue slaves in Haiti? Join the U.S. military and hope that they send you on a humanitarian journey to Darfur or something. Then you can actually change the world for the better, save some people from ISIS or something. If you're worried about, like, racial, you know, problems like segregation, well, go to Egypt. Did you know this? That people in Egypt who are black are considered, like, second-class citizens by most of their culture there? By people who are of more, you know, Arabic and, like, North African descent? Like, people who are of darker skin colors, they're mistreated often in places like Egypt. It's considered, or Turkey, something like that. You should hear. Why don't you try talking to people around the world and see what racial opinions are really like in some of these other countries? I have. I get to talk to people from all sorts of countries, and you'd be very, very surprised what people's opinions are around the world. And before you say, oh, well, but Sticks, You make like right wing, which is wrong, but whatever. Content, so a bunch of like nationalists and stuff message you, and it doesn't really matter if they're like Turkish or Indian or something. They're still like on the right, so-called. No, I'm talking about people who like talked to me back when I was a liberal and stuff. I was actually very, very surprised. You see, I was part of that bubble too. Even though I wasn't, as far as wealth, class was concerned, I was still, working class, lower middle class. So, I hadn't been risen up or anything. But in the racial sense, yes, I had lived most of my life in Vermont, although I had lived briefly in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is more diverse. It's also more urbanized. And so forth. I would admit that, yeah, I hadn't had a lot of physical entanglements with people who were of other races at the time. I hadn't really traveled much yet. But I can talk to them online, and I can still get people's opinions. And you'd be very, very surprised, I think, if you bothered to talk to people around the world, what they actually thought. Now, what do you think the average person in, say, India, Turkey, a place like that, what do you think they would think about you getting offended by the idea that it's okay to be white? They would call you crazy, assuming that you're yourself white. They would call you insane. They would think that you were nuts. They'd be like, why would you want to feel guilty about yourself? What, because of some ancestral sin? Don't you know who you sound like? You sound like the Evangelocons with their idea of original sin. Oh, up to the 4th generation, you must, you will have the sins of your fathers and grandfathers on you. Well, okay, what a very enlightened concept. I think most people left that behind in the Dark Ages, or at the very least at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, when things advanced a little bit more culturally. You seem to be living in maybe like the 900s AD. Honestly, that's my opinion of you. You're the one that's short-sighted and small-minded, not me. I know what it's like to be poor. I have an idea of what privilege actually entails. Look, I've risen up at this point to the upper middle class. I'm well aware that I'm doing much better than I was when I was young. But I still remember what it's like to be like that. That does inform my view of reality. I've been on those different rungs. Now, I can't magically turn myself into a black person and go experience life as a black man or something. That's just not something I can do. There were some things. I had a documentary called like Black Like Me, I think it was, where the dude there, he made himself black with like hormones of some sort that caused him to absorb more melanin. And then he was talking about, oh yeah, I was kind of looked down on and mistreated. Well, that may be so. At the same time, though, you can accomplish the same thing by dressing more shabbily and driving an old, like a 90s era car. Oh, trust me, people will treat you totally differently than when you look upstanding or you look like you just walked out of a gated community. There's gonna be a difference. Your dating opportunities will probably be a little bit different too. Oh, I'm going to go home and meet your dad, you say. Well, there's going to be a little bit of a difference, probably, most situations. But the reaction is if you show up wearing a suit as opposed to you show up looking like Kurt Cobain. There's going to be a difference. And we need to be capable of admitting that fact. Yes, people are treated unfairly and unequally all the time in life. Yeah, and somebody like me who happens to be white, I can be treated unfairly by some white trust funder who has 10 times as much money as I do coming in, simply because I'm white and I don't feel guilty about that fact. So keep that in fucking mind. That's about all. Peace out.